Perfect. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to CMI's Future Leader Fest 2019. Today we're doing a live stream on radical workplaces. I am Will Smith, I'm CMI's Public Affairs Manager, and I am joined by a fantastic panel to talk about the expectations of future leaders. So our panel, we have Olivia Knight, founder of the gift sharing platform Patchwork and chair of Sharing Economy UK. We have Patrick McGurk, Programme Director for the Chartered Manager Degree Apprenticeship for Social Change at Queen Mary University. And we will soon have, if she's not already there, Halima Baker-Mir, who was one of the first cohort to graduate from the Chartered Manager Degree Apprenticeship and currently works for Nestle. So thank you for joining us, guys.
Thank you.
Very excited to have a conversation with you today. So to set the scene, at CMI, our current flagship research project is Management 4.0, in which we're looking how you best prepare managers and leaders for the fourth industrial revolution. The fourth industrial revolution being kind of the radical changes that are coming with AI and automation and robots, and how all these digital forces will potentially change, displace, kind of transform job roles. I think a lot of the research we see, kind of which goes hand in hand with that, is about the attributes and the behaviours of the different generations, millennial leaders, all the gens, and kind of what they think, and just talk about them as a big group. However, when you speak to them as individuals, 9 times out of 10, in my experience, they will turn around and go, I don't really fit in that.
Yeah, it's like we're all actually really human.
Individuals, isn't it? Who knew?
Yeah.
So I think today what we're going to do is hopefully have a bit of a chat about you guys as experts, what your insight on these shifts are, whether you agree with the generational narratives and those expectations, and whether we're then going to test you on some polls that we've done with our own future leaders to see if you're kind of in tune with their expectations, if that's okay. So just to start, as a bit of a disclaimer, as I say, we've got some polls and we're going to see what you think about the answers. I have to say that these were collected on our social media channels, and so whilst they were aimed at future leaders, so that's our 18 to 35 kind of managers who are perhaps in their first managerial role or training in education in some form. So whilst we've aimed it at the future leaders, these are open platforms, and so people can come and not be who they say they are or take part in the polls repeatedly. So we are not suggesting these polls are as robust as CMI's usual research, but hopefully they provide a bit of a conversation starter for today.
Great.
Yeah, good.
Perfect. Well, let's get straight into it then. So I think our first question, which hopefully will be on screen for our viewers, is how important is it for managers to show leadership in tackling climate change? Patrick, maybe I'll go to you first. What do you think our survey said about that?
Well, I hope it would say extremely important, because it could be argued that it's the #1 business and organisational priority now for the future. Certainly the Business Roundtable in the US recently in the summer, 181 large businesses seem to think so, climate change alongside social justice for employees. So I'd like to think it's considered extremely important, because it is going to and should dominate, I think, management education for the next few decades.
Yeah,
so that's perhaps a minority opinion at the moment, I don't know.
We'll see. What do you think, Olivia?
I 100% agree. I very much hope it is the priority issue, because none of us have any business at all on a dead planet. So we absolutely have to act decisively and very urgently. And I think it's up to all leaders to show that leadership.
I mean, the other thing to say as well is that it affects all sectors of the economy. It's not just the usual suspects who are seen to be, using a lot of fossil fuels, manufacturing and transport. It's a huge issue in the service sector economy as well. So lots of businesses, tech companies and so on, they're all using massive amounts of electricity. So how we do that in a sustainable way is going to be extremely important for all sectors, retail, distribution, all of that involves transport too. So it might look like a sort of clean business, but it's not. And so it's going to affect all sectors.
Perfect, cool. And I believe, hopefully by the wonders of technology, Halima has now joined us.
I have. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Halima.
Sorry I'm slightly late. Hope you're all well.
Sounds fine. And Halima, have you, hoping that you can hear me, can you
I can.
tell us what you think? How important is it for managers to show leadership in tackling climate change?
My personal opinion. I think it is quite important. I think quite a lot of people would echo that as well. I know that there's a lot of noise, especially in the media. We know that there's a lot of issues around anxiety when it comes to the current position of the climate. So I think it is important that line managers do role model anything in relation to improving the impact that they're currently having, even at a business level as well. So that's my view.
Perfect, cool. It's interesting you brought in the anxiety thing, and after a slight wobble, you might have seen us on the camera then. We can hear you perfectly now, so don't worry about that. So if, let's see what the results are then. So I think the panel will be happy to see that 71% think it is important to some extent, 29% think it's very important, 42% think it is moderately important, 7% not important, and 22% don't care.
And that was definitely don't care, not don't know. Don't care is quite active.
So I will say on that one that I imagine the don't care includes both people that don't care about climate change and people that don't care about their manager showing leadership in climate change.
And maybe people that don't care on Twitter. That means it very much.
Well, that's, you do. They're a small breed, aren't they?
Managers and leaders are not as important as people think they are. So.
That's very, very true. So what do you think? Is that a bit of hopefully not too far off what we were talking about? There's a big majority that are.
No, but I think your point's actually a really important one, which is that I think we obsess about leadership because culturally we have this idea that we need leaders, and of course we do. We're sitting here, it's very important to discuss. However, I think I would love to think that actually a generation are thinking that they can make a difference and they can make a change as well. So if I was to put a positive spin on your don't care, I hope it's where you were at, which is that maybe it's not all to be sat on the shoulders of leaders, and of course everybody has a role to play.
Perfect. Let's hope so. So I think, Patrick, I'm going to start with you, and I'm going to say that the heart of this question is kind of that potential shift towards more corporate responsibility, more kind of social impact, and a generation that are more aware of that. Would you agree that that shift is taking place? Do you think kind of our future leaders are more conscious than past generations, or is it just more aware of it because of social media and this kind of stuff?
No, I think it's genuine. I think there will always be a group of cynics, and cynicism and youth are often connected, but I think actually that the vast majority of young people are passionately interested in this particular area and anxious about it, as Halima has highlighted as well. I mean, you mentioned the sort of Gen Z and Gen Y and so on, these kinds of labels earlier on. I mean, nobody likes to feel that they're labelled, and there's been some negative stereotyping as well, I think, of young people, you know, the sort of selfish snowflake type of label. And I don't find that. I find that young people, students, are passionately interested in issues of climate change, in issues of justice, diversity, equality, and so on. They may not be expressing their interest in the same way as people expressed them in the 1980s or 1990s, but nonetheless the expression is there. I mean, Greta Thunberg, for example, is all over the papers again this morning, and she's captured the imagination, I think, of a lot of young people, and is speaking for a whole group of people that realise that capitalism hasn't worked for them and for their future. So,
Really interesting.
I don't know if I've answered your question, but I'm a bit of a rant about young people.
No, and I think you're right that it's not when we're making, and I'm saying we, like collectively, when those generalizations are made about different generations, of course, you know, if you're ever identifying a generation or a trend, you're going to be, you know, reducing and being very reductive in that and oversimplifying to an extent. But I think the important thing to note is that whilst within generations, of course, there's huge diversity of opinion and experience and all the rest of it, we are really affected by the times that we live in because our conditions affect well, literally our consciousness, how we behave. And actually the generations that are growing up are, we know, feeling a much greater risk in terms of their personal kind of safety, security, their future, whether that's about, the education system and how it's being provided for them, the debt that they come into when they're incurring, debt during their education, the sort of job instability, the inability to get their sort of foot on the housing ladder, which historically we've seen as very important. It might be in the coming years that actually ownership of a house and the sort of obsession again that we have with ownership, particularly in this country and our culture, may turn out to be not as relevant. But for now, it's that transition generation which are expected to behave in the same ways that their parents have done, and yet all of the security that their parents' generation of experience are sort of being pulled away from them. So I think this thing about anxiety, definitely. The concerns about the planet are a much bigger concern, but people are also worried about their day-to-day existence and how they can make life work for them. And it's almost a luxury to be able to worry about those existential things for many people, and that's not limited to this generation we're talking about. When you're worrying about yourself and worrying about how you're going to pay your bills and how you're going to be able to have a flat and how you're going to be able to get a job. So I think those things all come into play, basically.
It's interesting. I think that what you say about the home ownership thing, when you have those traditional goals which seem almost unassailable, then it makes sense that they would look at, future leaders would look to what else can I achieve, or what other impact can I have, That's really, really interesting. Halima, I don't know if you want to come in on those points, or do you want to tell us whether kind of the CSR kind of angle, corporate social responsibility, came into your thought process,
decision making.
When you were choosing your PMDA and the company you wanted to do with?
Yeah, so actually just to build on what everyone else was discussing, so when it comes to purpose, being purpose driven, there's a lot, I can only speak for myself and a lot of people my own age and in my own groups, there's a lot of noise again in the media around making sure that you do live a purposeful life and making sure that you do things that you are passionate about, or rather that you work for a company that you are passionate about and has the right values that you're looking for. I think my generation are often stereotyped as, I think we mentioned, snowflakes, and we do really want to have a purpose-filled career. So that's my build on that. Did it come into my decision making? It didn't at first, but then the reason why I joined Nestlé was actually I was based and living in Halifax before. I noticed that we had a factory there and they weren't at an apprenticeship event, which I thought was quite bizarre given that they'd be the biggest employer in the town. To be honest, I was attracted to the size of the company and the fact that I could potentially move globally in a role. So that was actually important to me at the time. And the security in that as well. Obviously, being in a well-established business that's been around for over 150 years, you'd be relatively safe. I think startups are quite risky from my own perspective. But when I did join Nestlé, I think there was a bit of am I going to stay or am I going to go? But then as I settled in and I learned more around, the commitments that we've made, particularly when it comes to recycling and reducing our carbon emission, the practical changes that we're making now, it is really fulfilling to see. It is really good, and it is one of the reasons why I probably will stay around with my employer a bit longer, because it's good to see that they care about the future of the environment, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And you make a extremely valid point. I think when you're probably taking your first or maybe like second or third step onto your career ladder, you probably, that, as you say, probably isn't forefront of your mind. You're thinking, one, probably what's the pay like, and then two, is it a kind of a nice inclusive workplace? Can I see myself working here and enjoying it? And then that social impact might come a little bit later. It's quite interesting. So I just wanted to ask one more question on this. Aimed at you, Olivia. Again, going back to the social impact angle, do you think this is why we're seeing, hopefully what you would agree with, is like an explosion in the sharing economy?
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. So as chair of the sharing economy, we as a trade body represent a very diverse range of UK-based businesses. So it's very sort of hard to define exactly what a sharing economy business is in terms of the product or the service it offers. But what we do say, and we all agree with as a trade body, is that all our members say we're about empowering people to utilise resource and reduce waste. And that's exactly what happens when you share stuff, right? So enabling people to share their space or their skills or their stuff. So we represent businesses like my own, like Patchwork, which is a global group gift platform, but also companies like Airbnb or Gumtree. So I think coming back to this point about capitalism being a real, currently sort of the way we've structured it being in sort of conflict with our environment, we really do have to think that we need to find new ways of generating economic growth through not consuming and disposing of goods, like our sort of traditional consumption in terms of the model that we've been working towards and sort of hurtling towards for the last 100 years, we know is really damaging to our environment. But what's really hard is for existing companies that are already based on that model to shift. We've heard from the head of Henny's, didn't we, last week or 2 weeks ago, saying, please, you know, this younger generation needs to continue buying fast fashion, if not we're going to go bust. And that's not the answer. We can't say to people, we know it's damaging, we know it exploits labour and the environment, but we need you to keep buying our stuff so that we can succeed. We have to find different models. And the sharing economy, just coming back to the point about ownership with houses, is we have always been obsessed with our definition of ourselves being sort of explicitly connected to what we own, what we can consume, what we can buy, what we can keep, what we have with us physically. And I guess the sharing economy is just common sense stuff, which is to say we can share the things, and if we can create ecosystems and economic viability with people still being able to rent. And if you rent a dress, you're still, money is changing hands, it's going into the economy, but that dress is not being wasted, left in someone's wardrobe, it's going round, it's a circular economy thing. So yeah, I think in terms of social and environmental impact, that's one of the huge reasons that we're seeing an explosion of sharing economy businesses. It also helps people to save money, because effectively you can, if you're going away for a weekend, you may as well Airbnb your flat if you're lucky enough to own one, because you can make money while you're away, paying for your weekend away. But yes, I think the environmental thing is huge, certainly for our members, definitely.
Really interesting. I do need to move on. I've got producer Joe in my ear saying we need to go to the next question, but I can't. Patrick, it's really interesting that Olivia talks about kind of empowering people to make those choices and very much bottom up and coming from those future leaders. Obviously, CMJ Social Change is kind of really bringing that in. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about how you feel the qualification is helping young people to perhaps lead those difficult conversations.
Well, for one, it's an alternative career path. All organisations in any sector need good management and good leadership. And some of the big charities are very professionalised now anyway. So there are lots of sort of new career routes. You don't have to go into the traditional private sector or the traditional corporate grad scheme. And young people, I think, appreciate that there is an alternative career path as a manager. So you can take big responsible decisions and play big responsible roles at work without dealing with multi-million-pound budgets and buying and selling and manufacturing necessarily. So there's that. But I think the very fact that a lot of young people have been involved in volunteering and campaigning, they've really cottoned on to the fact that, you know, you can have a satisfying and rewarding career pursuing the sort of social interests that you're passionate about. So, for example, in the employers that are involved in our new degree apprenticeship, for example, we've got Minds, the mental health charity, we've got Scouts, we've got Action for Children, we've got the Princess Trust, we've got WaterAid, which is one of the more internationally orientated charities, you know, sort of international development work, and so on. So we've got the Young Gamblers Association, so the charity to help with gambling addictions among young people, particularly gaming and that kind of thing. So it's quite an interesting, diverse group of employers. And if students can network around these diverse sets of interests, they find that there's quite a lot in common, actually, in terms of how do you mobilise interest, how do you do it digitally in a sort of carbon neutral way. How do you also make connections between the public, the private and the third sector? There might even be international connections that you can make as well, particularly with development projects. So it's just a kind of interesting new opportunity, I think, for young managers and young leaders.
Yeah, definitely. We, as a CMI, we're obviously very interested in watching it closely. So yeah, it's great. But we will go on to the second question now. And so that is, how many times do you expect to change jobs over your working life? So for this question, we gave 4 categories, which were 0 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 15, and 16 to 20 plus. 16 plus. Thanks, Joe. What do we think?
You're asking me personally?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't think I'll change that many more times before I.
Oh, sorry, no, the
Before
future.
I die. No, okay.
I see.
But young people, well, if you're going to have a 50-year career, I think
if you're lucky.
If you're lucky, well, if you
Yeah.
work for 50 years, let's say, then I think you could expect to change every couple of years at least. So I think at least 25 plus. Yeah, the job roles. Maybe not the same employer, but certainly job roles.
Yeah,
I was going to go your 15 one, 15 to 20, did you say? What did you say, 15 to?
Yeah, I think 16 plus. Sorry, I'm not going to run me, but something along those lines.
Yeah, I would say my mark would be kind of around 15 times. Only because I think, or maybe I would hope that I think the sort of I think it slows down once you find the things that have become more meaningful. So that would be my hunch, is that certainly in your 20s, you're kind of learning, a couple of 2 years stint, you're moving, you're changing, but hopefully what's happening is you're at least identifying, coming back to this point about purpose, what it is that matters to you, and maybe as you find your skills and your experience that you can slightly stretch that out, because I think it's also quite stressful, the idea of changing like job and career that much. So I'm with you that it's probably very high. I'm hoping it's somewhere around 15.
What about you, Halima?
I was going to say around 16 plus, because I was just reflecting now, and since I've joined in 2015, I've already been in 8 different jobs. So that's over the space of a few years. So it's definitely going to be 16 plus easily.
Cool.
At least,
Perfect.
yeah,
Alright,
I think
well,
so. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Let's
Well,
see.
changing jobs.
Oh.
How many times do you expect to change jobs in your working life? 10% 5 or less. 68% said 6 to 10. 19% said 11 to 15, and only 4% said the 16 plus, which was where I think almost the panel landed. So it's quite interesting. Obviously, perhaps not the most rigorous way to ask a question, but I think it's quite interesting. I think everyone that in preparation with this live stream today, everyone that we showed this to, started counted up like you did then, Halima, and gone, oh well, I'm 30 and I've already had this many. Trying to put themselves on the scale there. Is that a bit of a shock to you, Halima?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Although that's my immediate reaction. Although to be fair, I have. Yeah.
I think one of the interesting questions.
Don't know if anyone can hear me. Oh, yeah, I'm back, I think.
Sorry, Halima, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. I think it froze for a second. No, my immediate reaction was that does surprise me, but then at the same time.
We might come back to you in a second just because we're having a bit of a problem with the audio there. Olivia.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, we'll come back to you in a second, Halima. Sorry about this. So I think this raises, from the kind of the companies and the firms' perspective, this is an interesting kind of shift for both attracting and retaining talent, because it feels like, well, perhaps it isn't. If we're expecting people moving around a lot, that suggests that it's probably quite easy to attract new talent, but then perhaps very difficult to hold on.
To retain. Yeah,
but then maybe that's not what our future leaders, if they're...
Yeah, and I think also we have to kind of shape the kind of working environment and experience that we want to see, not just respond to the current reality. So I think personally, as a leader and an employer, yes, you always want to be able to attract new talent, but you all people in and that are excellent at the work that they do. So I think if the danger of this is that it sort of almost becomes self-fulfilling, is that young people think I have to keep moving, employers think there's no point investing in them because they'll probably move on anyway, and that could be quite a negative spiral. So I think it's really, really important that we still work to attract people, invest in them, nurture those relationships, because that's actually when you do get the best out of people. The idea that that I think a lot of young people that I speak with feel at the moment is, God, I also have to keep moving, because if I stay in a job for too long, I don't look ambitious, and I think we've created also a very weird sort of culture around moving, and always means progress, and I think that could potentially be quite harmful for businesses and for individuals, particularly when we're talking about well-being and our own sense of worth and value and purpose, you know.
No, I do agree with that, and I think also if we're talking about creating an environment where we can get a bit more stability and create the sort of environment that we want, rather than, you know, this sort of reactive thing that you mentioned. The other thing is that is incumbent upon us, you know, CMI, but also employers, professional bodies and so on, is to create pathways. I think pathways where people can carve out a career. So you might change roles within that pathway, but there is something to follow. Now that might be just sort of idealistic on my part. People in universities as well, and people in education like to sort of map out qualification pathways and different levels and stages and so on. Maybe those times are gone, I don't know, but certainly at the lowest, what would be called the lowest skill end of the economy, this is becoming pretty critical, you know, in care, in retail and so on. There's so much churn, it's ridiculous, and there's no stability there at all, and it's damaging patients, it's damaging relationships with customers and communities and so on. So we do need to try and get some more stability in there, but it is incumbent upon governments really and professional bodies to start putting some of these pathways in place. Otherwise we're all chasing, you know, sort of short-term opportunities all the time.
Yeah, I mean, on the other hand, I think the idea that through our lives we have the opportunity, or we have a very different opportunity and a positive one, to keep learning and to be moving on and forward, but always also in parallel, is great. I mean, the thing that's the shock is we're all surprised that perhaps this is only 6 to 10 jobs, 68% is saying, but actually if you just went back 30 years, people would have been saying 1, you know, or 2. So that's already quite a big shift if you're going from like 1 career to effectively 10 careers in that bracket. It's still quite a big shift.
Yeah.
And also just one other point to make perhaps as well is that what have hitherto been called the lower skill areas or occupations are actually going to become very high in demand in the future, particularly the creatives. And that could be around hairdressing, floristry, it could be around looking after pets, it could be all these sorts of areas of the economy, the service part of the economy, and professional services and personal services part of the economy. That you wouldn't trust a robot with. Exactly, you can't automate them. So you know, they're going to become, you know, fairly hot property, people who can specialise in these areas, and if we can create pathways there and higher sort of qualifications and opportunities there, then I think that would be great. I think that's what we've got to do.
Perfect. Let's see, Halima, are you back? And can you hear us again?
Hello. Yeah, I can hear you. That's fine. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can.
Yeah.
Sorry, that must have
Perfect.
been
No, it's fine.
So you mentioned that in your current job you've had kind of 8 separate roles, was it?
Yeah. So I joined on the CMDA scheme, and within that structure, I moved around 4 different functions, and then specialised in a separate 5th. And then now that I'm in HR, I've been in I don't know how many roles. So I think that number does surprise me, but simply because from my own perspective, I wouldn't want to stay in a role for longer than a maximum of 5 years out of, well, hopefully by 5 years, you should be very competent in the role that you're in, at which stage I would then question, right, what value am I actually adding? Am I bringing in a new perspective? Am I challenging in the right way? What value am I adding now? It really does depend what route you go down, but I'd say a maximum of 5 years for me. So that number does surprise me a bit.
Yeah, and I also think it's the difference, isn't it, between a role, a job, and a career. So people might be interpreting this differently. Yeah, I mean, a role within a team, you think change more. And as you say, in a way, traditionally we used to talk about a job, like I'm a hairdresser, that's my job. And you might have worked in 6 different salons or 10 different salons. So I think it is a difference between what you're doing in terms of your passion and your career and your longer term, you know, commitment, particularly to an industry or a culture or an ideal, versus like what's your role and which company are you working for.
Yeah. And so Halima, so Patrick just mentioned the G word, the government. Obviously, we are in a general election campaign at the moment, and already this week we've had 2 separate proposals for how lifelong learning should work in the future.
Yeah.
So kind of how people can reskill and retrain, perhaps if their jobs are being displaced by automation, or if they just want to change.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that you could foresee maybe in a decade or two's time? You go, you know what, I've had it with HR, I'm going to go into bakery or whatever else. Like, do you see that happening in your lifetime?
In my lifetime, yes, simply at the rate that technology is advancing, I think it is definitely wise to start putting in plans to ensure that skills, knowledge, basically that our workforce is agile, no matter what industry you're in. I think that it's something that's going to need to be done, but it's definitely achievable within my lifetime, or at least I'd hope so. But at the speed Brexit's happening at, I can't really be sure.
No, you said the B word. Can't do that.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. So Patrick, you at the very when we were kind of guessing about this question, you also alluded to the fact that working lives are getting longer. So how do you kind of, I guess from Halima's point about making sure that we're all agile, do you think as a country we're well suited to that? Will we meet that challenge, and will we be able to incorporate older workers alongside younger workers and make sure that everyone's getting that fulfillment from work that they need?
No, I don't. I think we're completely prepared for it. I think we've got a very insecure labour market, which makes it very hard for people to take risks and move. I personally think that the universal basic income is an idea whose time has come. I think it's just a question of time before it's introduced. It's already being piloted in Finland, for example, and the Netherlands, which I think will allow people to a bit of time and space to look after their families and reskill and take some risks in what they do, without this lurching from one crisis to another, and then one burnout job to drought, and then lurching to another one. So no, I think we're completely unprepared for it. I think I have to say this, but I think a lot of the educational and skills work that's going on is fantastic. But once you've finished, it's very hard to do it alongside your job at the moment for a start, and there isn't much investment in pathways, as I said, and there isn't much investment in development. So while the content of a lot of the qualifications might be excellent at the moment, I think it's not an integrated system at all, and there's got to be some big shifts in the future. I just think it's inevitable. I don't think it's sustainable what we're trying to do at the moment anyway. I mean, that's just my view.
Yeah, do you think Flow isn't doing enough at the moment, Olivia?
I think the answer is probably no at the moment. I have hope, but again, I think it's about, I can only speak from a sharing economy sort of perspective, I guess, but I think the benefits that platform businesses and digital businesses bring, hopefully, is that people can have more flexibility, if it's stating the obvious, but to work from home, and particularly while they are caring for other people, whether that's children or family members. And it will really, really help in terms of bringing a sort of equality of access across the country, because we know that not only are we hugely London-centric, but we're also very South-centric. So the idea that digital technologies and platform businesses that enable people to, as we do, trade, space, skills, stuff, earning income while sitting at home being under their own roof is really positive for those communities where people can't easily get out and connected to the big city hubs where most sort of traditional employment would be happening. I think it has risks, and I think we often at the sharing economy have to sort of define and distinguish between sharing economy business models and gig economy labour practices, because a few of our members will employ people on a gig economy sort of employment structure, and many of the brands and businesses we represent are absolutely traditional employers. They just run platform businesses. And I think we're very, very keen at sharing economy to celebrate flexible working and the benefits that brings. And it's not just if you're a parent, or just if you're a student, or just if you're caring for somebody. The idea that we should be able to promote that kind of work that can actually work for you in your life and enable you to learn alongside or do the other things in your life that are important to you is crucial for us, whilst at the same time protecting and making sure that people aren't at risk, because that flexibility on the flip side might bring insecurity. So I think, and I actually agree with you totally about the idea of a universal basic income. I think it feels like it's going to happen, and it feels like it probably should, given where we're at. So yeah, interesting times.
Yeah, definitely. Well, on that point, let's move on to the last question. So that is, so we gave our future leaders a statement and we asked them to say whether they agreed or disagreed that the education system has prepared / is preparing me well for working in the fourth industrial revolution. I think we might have skipped on to this a little bit in that question. What do you think? Do you think our cohort felt well prepared to kind of battle out with the robots, or what are you thinking?
I think young people are more adaptable, they're more comfortable with technology, that's one thing. They're more comfortable with creativity, with working in teams. So that's all on the plus side. I think a lot of that in universities and colleges, a lot of that happens by accident, actually. I don't think we're planning that in properly into our curriculum and in the way that we work, our pedagogy. I don't think it's moved on sufficiently quickly at all. And the Chartered Association of Business Schools is grappling with this as well at the moment. I know the CMI is. So that's all good. I think the content of what we're doing and the way in which we're working in our normal subject silos and in our subject areas, rather than talking about management problems, and management problems that have a sustainability dimension, that have a digital dimension, I think that's the way we need to go, is a much more problem-based, management problem-based or leadership problem-based approach, and project-based approach to learning, and I think we're miles behind. We're miles away from that. I know that there are some universities around the world that are doing a really good job on this, but the mainstream sort of university curriculum and business school curriculum isn't, I don't think. But we're focusing on young people. I think probably the bigger challenge is going to be the upskilling of the existing workforce. I mean, you can't just wait for everybody to retire and kind of replace people with newly trained staff, and I think that's going to be a huge challenge. If you take a sector like financial services, for example, massive employer here in the City of London or here in the wider region of London and South East. Many of these jobs are going to be automated quite quickly, but you can't just get rid of everybody. You've got to kind of find a way of working with it and reskilling and redeveloping and redeploying what people actually focus on, because there is some research that suggests for all the jobs that are going to be automated out, there's going to be just as many created in new sorts of roles. So I think that's probably the bigger challenge. It's not so much people coming through, it's the people already in the workforce, aged between, let's say, 30 right through to 60. That's a very big group that we need to be concerned with, I think.
Thoughts on the question? Agree or disagree?
Did we have options?
Just agree or disagree for education system has prepared me well for working in the fourth industrial.
I don't the question, sorry.
No, okay, so I would say, coming to your point, I think it tends to be, again, another obsession for us, particularly people over 40, over 50, to go, we must prepare the young people for the digital age, and actually they're digital natives. Of course, I'm not talking about, if we're talking about our universities preparing us by actually educating kids in AI, like we're talking about deep tech and coding and stuff, if we're saying the digital age, that's the last thing I would say we need to be worrying about. I would be saying, because of the digital future that we are already embracing, we need to be making sure that our universities aren't trying to teach young people the things they're already comfortable with, but are making sure we're teaching young people their human skills, which are irreplaceable. So I'm not sure of the answer, and I'm sort of dodging the question, but I guess I would say things like, so there's a London interdisciplinary school, I think it's called, and I think what's interesting about that is saying, actually, what the sort of current environment is teaching young people, children, and my kids in particular noticing it, growing up with, is that the digital age is bringing us speed, information that's so instant, so quick, so digestible, so disposable, that what we need to get back to learning, I think, and valuing is long form, time, critical thinking, things that allow us to actually apply and rigorously challenge what we see rather than just consuming what we see. And I think it's education's role to continue to educate our children brilliantly, not to try to do the job of teaching them to fit in with a digital world.
Yeah,
does that make sense? So I don't know whether their response is, yeah, I'm not worried because I'm already, I mean, I would, yeah, or whether they just think university is doing some, you know, difficult jobs on many levels. As you know, what I'm going to say is my biggest fear is that our education system, which we currently have to pay for, is already doing a disservice by not preparing people for the world as they come out afterwards, because we're already excluding huge groups of people from having that education, and we're burdening them with a massive debt when they come out. So I've got more fundamental questions about our current education structure, and think that generally the teachers and students that I meet are as brilliant and bright and amazing as they ever were, and that the challenges they face tend to be external structural funding ones. But don't get me on my soapbox.
Halima, you're my last chance. Someone's not going to dodge the question. Do you want to say whether they agreed or disagreed?
I reckon they disagreed. Simply from my own experience at university, hearing from people that I know that went to university, there's absolutely no mention of a digital workplace. There's no mention at all of the workplace of the future. There's none. That's my very straight answer. I think it's a disagree.
Show you the results, and I'm very happy to say, Halima, that you are absolutely right.
Incredible. It's bad, but glad I'm right.
I mean, do you feel prepared now?
No.
And is that in any way? Oh, there we go.
No, straight no. I think I would echo what was said earlier, in that the interpersonal skills and actually knowing what to do with data, knowing what to do with the information that you see and that you can so quickly receive, is in essence what is going to keep us working. If we are not actually educating people into making decisions based on the information that we're going to get through technology, what's the point? That's my very blunt and honest opinion. But no, I do not feel prepared. I mean, I'd agree that younger people tend to be more adaptable. They've grown up in a place where there's been a lot of technology. There's a lot of developments on technology. We're used to that sort of change. I would disagree with the fact of having a lot of focus on the older generation. I feel like there's a lot of noise, and they almost feel a bit, we have to take extra care here, we have to do a lot more training. I would disagree with that. I think that's kind of a bit patronizing from my own opinion. I think 100% there needs to be a lot of training, no matter what the age. I think even as a typical 22-year-old, I stereotypically should be incredible with technology. I'm not. I'll hold my hands up and say that I'm not. So there is a lot of work to be done, I think.
And Halima, do you think that is the response? I mean, who does that fall with in the long term? Is that the kind of the education system in the universities and kind of what they're teaching, and do they need to go back and look at what we actually need to know when we're entering the workplace, or is that kind of an employer like Nestle having a clear pathway and plan for you when you join that company, or what do you think?
I think from an employer perspective, it should definitely be offered. And, if you're getting someone brand new, fresh into the business, it should be mandatory, right? Understanding how to use information and technology in the workplace and what's available to you. From a university perspective, I think it's kind of a collective thing. I think both employers and universities need to work better together. We already know, and this is me going off on a slight tangent, we know fewer people are going to university. They're choosing alternative options. They're either going straight into employment or they're finding apprenticeships, which is why it's important that an employer and a university would think, well, okay, so what skills do you need for a workplace, and how can I actually make sure that I'm teaching you academic theory, I'm teaching you how to use your brain, but also in the context of a digital workplace. So I think it does overlay for me a bit.
Perfect, fair enough. So I'm very aware of time, and so unfortunately, whilst this discussion could go on, I'm sure, for a couple of hours, I'm very, very interested, we will have to bring it to a close. I want to ask one more question, just because Helene says she's not prepared. Patrick and Olivia, you are obviously future leaders in our eyes, but when you first joined the workplace, did you have these kind of, did you have any concern about like the future, what the future may hold, and do you think it might just be this is, again, maybe your first or second step onto the ladder, and you're just kind of cautious about what we hold? Do you think it's generation specific, or I'm sorry, I've not left you much time to answer that. But...
well, I studied English literature and anthropology, and then came out of university and went straight into advertising. So on the one hand, those two things seemed very extreme and different, and I guess my point being, coming back to the point I made earlier, is that if education allows you to be curious, open your mind, and we can make our own parallels. So actually what made me very successful in my early career in advertising was applying all of the kind of creativity, the thinking, the analytical, the observations, all that kind of stuff around human behavior into the world of brands and brand building. So I didn't have any fears, but I also think we were living in a very different time. I had a free education. I came out, the job market was very, very robust, and I don't think I was fearful of my future, and therefore I don't think I was planning it so rigorously. I was just seeing opportunities and embracing them, and I think that's actually a luxury now that I look back and sort of think the world that we're living in now and graduates coming into it's probably not quite that easy to be accidentally successful, you know, and that's a shame, but it means we have to behave differently, and as you say, prepare people much more for that tricky road ahead, maybe.
Thinking back, no, I wasn't concerned at all. I'm not sure what I was thinking, but I was just, I felt reasonably secure in the future that interesting things were going to happen. I think that sort of university education generally does open the mind and does breed confidence in people. And I think many people need to be more aware, I think, of the skills that they have developed. So if you've done English, or if you've done history, or if you've done modern languages, or a STEM degree, or whatever, you know, you have developed these kind of analytical skills that are incredibly helpful in the workplace, and they will see you through. I think if you have that confidence, it doesn't matter really what you studied, as long as you're open-minded and reflective. But that confidence in the future does worry me a lot for the generation that's coming into the workplace now. As I said earlier, I think it's a much more kind of insecure labour market that people are going into, and I think it is the responsibility of the government and the professional bodies and so on to try and address this, because I think it's going to hamper the development of talent, and we're going to miss a lot of talent as a result.
Perfect. Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for your time today, guys. Thank you so much for joining us as well, Halima. I'm very, very sorry we lost you for a moment, but I'm very glad we got you back.
Sorry, I was slightly late.
It's all right, not a problem at all. It's been absolutely fantastic to get your insights. Thank you so much for joining us. For our viewers, to hear more about how CMI can support our members to get ahead in the workplace, please sign up to CMI's Future Leaders Community, our network for young professionals with tailored advice to stand out from the crowd. You can find more information at www.managers.org.uk/future leaders, and hopefully producer Joe's got it up so I'm not looking like an idiot. And follow #FutureLeadersFest19 to keep in the loop with all of CMI's activities this week. We've got a couple more events that you can find out more information, and we'd love for you to come and join us if you're free. That hashtag, you'll also find tailored toolkit to kind of understand how we can support you with your qualification. And finally, on that hashtag, let us know what you thought about this session. If you liked it, let us know, and we'll definitely get more of these in. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
The line, and we'll see you all later.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.